Luch the poet, and I think he's scheduled to give us a reading of the work that is the literary basis, the poetic basis of the books that Deborah was just talking about. And Deborah's talk made me think. I feel I should know it already, but how Beatrice and Deborah and Luch and I and lots of others, but just thinking of these four people, have shared these things that Deborah's talking about back into our early maturity, how we've published and been involved in printing and methods of printing and doing unique editions, small editions, and so on, by different kinds of methods. And I think to myself, it's one of those things that I encountered on the scholarly side and felt maybe obscurely, but what Deborah says throws a light on it. People were reading with some astonishment Walter Benjamin's essay on reproduction and its importance in modern civilization and how it changes things. The idea that the painter can have a reproduction by producing an engraving, which is then printed, and that the painter works for towards the reproduction, and then what's the original? To what extent? How do you destroy the edition? Keep it to only 200 or 400 and so on, and how it just threw a light on how what Luch is doing here is almost an apotheosis of something that we knew without and before any knowledge of Walter Benjamin that we were a part of, just as Degas had been part of it 100 years earlier. It's very interesting to think of. The other thing it made me think is, I love what she said about how painstaking it is and how you can get bored and frustrated at certain parts, and there can be parts that are just going on. Isn't that life? And isn't it an art that replicates life? Doesn't the poet know boredom? Doesn't the poet know those areas which are difficult to get over and yet have to be said and at the same time have to be ennobled? They can't be let just go. It's as if the production of the true book has that. There's Hannah Arendt in one of her books discussing globalization as it was in the 1950s and its deleterious effect on human beings, said now anybody can travel anywhere on the earth. It takes no significant portion of any human life, and so it makes no impression. And I abstract that to the principle, which I've written many times. Anything that does not take a significant portion of a human life is worthless to you. It's worthless to you. It isn't real. And so the poet knows this, and it takes the poet back to the book and to the total work and away from the illusion. Oh, I wrote a really good poem really quickly. It only took me 2 days. No, that's not what you're doing. You're doing this whole journey all the time. Well, Luch, that's a bit of a divagation from me, but Luch to me is one of the greatest and heroic exemplars of the kind of things I'm talking about. The constant vibration between the mind, which we as human beings have, for not just natural things, and the temptation to abstraction, but the idea that mind is not purely abstraction either. Mind, too, in its strange way, is a part of nature. And then on the other hand, the wordless materiality of things, and a constant going back to those things to try to grasp and refresh and so forth from these. I was just reading his book, The Examined Life. It's just a fantastic book. I'm tempted to give a sample of him by reading a poem, which is truly great, but I'm afraid I feel it too painful to read at this point. So I will read some from this poem, which is page 101 of the Examined Life, which is really magnificent 2018 book. Near the garden gate where the path begins is a tall oak, and under it is a roughly hewn bench where one can read and think, then close the book and press the thoughts upon each other. The path is close to the steps of both the thinker and the woodsman who fells the trees. The oaks are plentiful, and from their bark the boys cut out ships, float them in brook or well, and the scent of the hard-cut wood is testament of the steadiness with which the tree grew. To be grounded in such growth, to take root in the darkness. You can pause in the middle of the path, hear the faint bell of the tower clock. The metal trembles under the striking of the hour hammer. The silence becomes more silent, the simple more simpler. And in this simplicity, and on this path, the unspoken care watching over everything uncovers itself. Luch?
Thank you.